Hi everyone, welcome to Draftscapes. I'm Chris Tuccio. In this video I wanted to talk a little bit about creativity, and specifically how to become a better designer. Not necessarily about drawing or representing your designs, but actually the act of creating and how you can actually develop skills in becoming a designer that set you apart from other people or professionals in the field. That and more after this. Hi everyone. So I actually got a really good amount of feedback from my last video showing you an actual design that I was working on and the kind of drawing that I might put together for a client. And so I thought it'd be really good to actually show you one step further and walk you through sort of the process that I would go through in designing, and then talk a little bit about creativity and how you can sort of stimulate yourself to be a better designer. So if we zoom in, basically what I have here is a little front walkway to a residence. So we kind of have north going in this direction, and then some bluestone steps that we want to put in here, and then an existing kind of fieldstone wall here. And so the idea I was thinking of is doing something kind of to soften this edge, this sort of harsh edge here, maybe some type of conifer, evergreen, maybe like a Serbian spruce or something, dwarf variety. You do have some height here, but the window doesn't really start until about there. And then because this is kind of a nice little rock wall, I was thinking something along the lines of a creeping phlox. Although this is north facing, this area here gets a good amount of sunlight throughout the day. About, I'd say 2:30, 3 o'clock, it kind of just starts to get filtered sun, but most of that morning it's getting a lot of full sun from the south. So I thought it'd be a really nice dramatic effect to have a really show color summer ground cover overlapping that wall. So I thought creeping phlox might work. And then the blue stone with sort of that nice warm color of the phlox I thought would look nice. And so I wanted to kind of repeat that. I have an idea of maybe doing something that has both spring and fall interest. So you have enough space here, maybe doing something that is kind of a similar height, maybe like a fothergilla, which has nice spring blooms, but then also a nice light yellow orangish fall color to it that's kind of dramatic, would give you two-season interest. And so if I'm going to be doing that, the blue and the orange, or the blue and the yellow can be nice. And then maybe I'll throw in some sort of perennial here to kind of round out that composition before we move towards the actual steps to the house. So what I'll do is I'll work on that a little, and then let's talk a little bit about creativity and what you can do to become a better designer, and then we'll check back in and see what kind of design I came up with.
So typically students will come to me and they will say, I don't know how to design, or isn't there some sort of formula that I can use in order to design or become a better designer? And the answer really is that there's not. Design is not a mathematical problem that you can try and solve. Design is not something in which you can have one solution to a problem. There can be multiple solutions of varying degrees of correctness or success from a whole host of different designers. And we see that all the time with landscape design or landscape architecture competitions throughout the world. So the question there really becomes, how do I become a better designer? How do I know or get inspiration to become a better designer? And that's really the point that I want to talk about today, and that's developing this creative library or this creative portfolio. So when I say a creative portfolio or creative library, I don't necessarily mean a physical collection of books or even just a digital collection of pictures or books. I mean thinking of a mental library in which you are banking different experiences, different levels of knowledge of different topics, and you're saving them in your mind or on a bookshelf or in your computer so that you can call on them when a problem is presented to you in the landscape for you to use for the purposes of solving a design problem. And when I talk about that, the realization comes to people that design is derivative. And I really strongly believe that design is derivative, and it's something that you have to work through. So if you've had experiences, if you've traveled, or you've gone on hikes, or you've gone to different gardens, there are all these sort of little micro experiences that you've experienced along those journeys. Maybe it's not necessarily a visual experience, maybe it's a fragrant experience where you had different smells that wafted in your direction on a morning hike through the woods. Or perhaps it was a social experience where you were in a beautiful urban plaza and you noticed that individuals were gathering around areas of sunlight, and you noticed the way that the actual trees were casting really interesting shadows on the pavement within that way. So all these different little experiences would be banked in your creative library. And so the more you're attuned to thinking about those experiences, the better that you will be in drawing upon them when you are dealt a problem that you need to solve. So the question then becomes, how do I create or stimulate my creative library? How do I develop this creative portfolio for myself? And I really provide students these 4 tips at trying to be more creative or a better designer. And the first one is to make sure that you're looking at all design fields. It's very easy, especially in today's technological age, to kind of put blinders on and be within our echo chamber of landscape architecture or landscape design or horticulture. But, design is a language, and all different fields of design are different dialects of that same language. So it would help us if we can look at architecture and the way they go about solving problems, the way architects do. Or maybe we look at fashion design and the way that the forms and textiles drape might inform different ways in which we can use plants near a rock wall. Think about different graphic design or typographical design. Maybe we can use those to inform our lettering about, or the placement of graphics on an actual presentation board. Look at game design and the way that a user experiences a game, or software design. So what I'm trying to get at is there are a whole host of different problems that designers as a group face, whether or not you're an architect, a graphic designer, a fashion designer, a software engineer. All of those problems require critical solutions, and the way that we can be better at and more creative at developing those solutions is by looking at all different fields. So make sure you're looking at all different design fields. Pick up Architectural Digest. Go look at a web forum on graphic design. Take a class in art or sketching that's completely different than just landscape design work. All of those experiences will help you become a better creative designer moving forward. The next thing that I would say is absolutely keep a sketchbook with you every day. Keep a sketchbook with you on at all times, and make sure that you're logging different experiences within that sketchbook. Now, I talked a little bit about sketching exercises, and one of those things was actually keeping a sketchbook, sort of a daily journal, and making a habit of it. But you should have just a little pocket field notebook carried with you daily in your back pocket or in your purse that you can actually just draw from. And let's say, again, you're in sort of an environment and you notice something that you think is very interesting, or a nice little detail that you want to remember. Don't just necessarily take a picture of it. Take a moment, sketch it out, write a note to yourself. The act of stopping and doing that is going to sort of cue your memory that this was an important time and space that you noticed something, so that that little neuron can fire when you're presented with a similar problem and you need to find a creative solution. So keeping a daily sketchbook or keeping a sketchbook with you and making sure you're writing things down will always be important, no matter what kind of technology is out there. The next third tip is to really focus on fundamentals. And this is kind of a larger pet peeve that I have with landscape design and landscape architecture in general. But We're only as good as our experiences in the fundamentals of landscape design and architecture. And what I mean by that is, if I see a student that is specifying a particular tree and a planting of that particular tree, I would expect them to know what a root flare is and to not bury the root flare for the health of the tree. Similarly, if a certain student is specifying hardscape, particular maybe bluestone or some sort of manufactured paver, I would like them to know how the actual base material is laid down and sprayed and compacted and leveled. We need to really understand that our field, the landscape design field, deals with a lot of different materials, ephemeral materials, biodegradable materials, hard materials, structural materials, and getting your hands dirty and knowing how to actually physically put something together, whether it's a deck or actually pouring concrete and floating it yourself. All these different aspects of landscape construction, those fundamentals are extremely important for a designer. And if you haven't done those, or you haven't taken the time, and you don't need to spend years learning this, but if you haven't taken the time to really understand the fundamentals and the structural components of how a landscape is built, then you are really at a leg behind those designers that not only have good design intuition, but that also know the real nuts and bolts of the profession. And so I would behoove anybody to add to their creative portfolio the ability to specify and build some sort of landscape component, whether it's actually pouring a sidewalk, so you're laying the rebar and you're floating the concrete, actually using a ramming compactor to level subgrade and figure out how to put base material down for a paving patio, actually planting a tree and knowing where the root flare is and how it relates to the level of the soil, and then eventually the mulch that you'll put on top of it. Without these real fundamental parts of our education as landscape designers, we're really sacrificing a lot of future potential in creating beautiful details for clients. And then the last thing is really a daily topic, but that's create something every day. Design something for yourself within some sort of digital or ordinary sketchbook kind of platform every day. So force yourself for 10-15 minutes to think of a design problem and design it. And it doesn't necessarily need to be something that's related to landscape design. Just force yourself to think creatively every day. And so a good analogy here would be learning an instrument. If you were to spend 7 hours on only one day a week, let's say Sunday, trying to learn how to play guitar, you would probably be very weary and tired at the end of that session. And over the course of the next 6 days, you would probably lose a lot of what you learned over the course of those 7 hours. And then the next day that you actually play, a week later, your skills would not have improved that much because you've had this 6-day lag. Now, if instead you just simply paid 1 hour every day for the 7 days, you would see a much greater progression. And that kind of analogy is also true with design. Now, I'm not saying you need to carve out an hour every day. Again, we all live busy lives. But if you're just taking even just 15 to 20 minutes a day and just trying to sketch something or design something, and it doesn't necessarily need to be something very creative. Just get into the habit of maybe just sketching something that interests you, or even while watching TV, sketch a scene that you see that's very nice. But getting in the habit daily of thinking about something and creating something new every day will increase your intuition. So when the time arises where you're tasked in your job or in your studio class with actually creating something, it's like second nature. You know how to go through that process. It's not something that you're fearful of. You actually might be excited, and you have this wealth of portfolio of things that you've previously created that you can draw from. So with those 4 things, I believe that you can create a beautiful sort of creative portfolio that would serve you really well both within your academic and professional life. And so keep in mind that you have to work at it. It's not going to come naturally or quickly, and that it doesn't end. And you're always going to keep on adding to it and looking back and growing as a designer. And that's not a bad thing. And so here you have it. Basically, it took me about 10 minutes to just rough in this sketch, and I'll just add some color in a little later to make it pop again from sort of the architecture and the hardscape around it. But I have pretty much all my components. The spruce, the idea of the fothergilla. I went with some sort of like Russian sage here. I think that'd be kind of nice. Purple, cooler color flowers with the fall color of the fothergilla could look nice. And then when I render it, I'm going to pop in some color in the creeping thyme here. And again, I just made the fieldstone wall a little more opaque or transparent, just so it doesn't dominate the scene. It's a lot of texture there. With this kind of drawing, what I'll usually do is kind of like a 30%, 70% rule that's kind of common in digital drawing, in which I'm going to have about 30% of the drawing be very dynamic and a lot of specific interest, and then a good 70% of the drawing kind of just to let your eye rest. And so that kind of 1/3 rule is really nice to give a good compositional tone to your drawing. And so this is, again, the kind of thing that would be ready for a client. I just show them as a concept sketch my idea, see if they are in the same ballpark as me, and then we'd go one step further with specific cultivar, plant selection that I have in mind, and then go from there. So there you have it. Hopefully you'll take the time and think about developing a creative portfolio or a creative library for yourself. Creativity and design is not something that comes overnight or just something that you're born with. It's something that you really have to work at. So if you like the content of Draftscapes, make sure you subscribe to the channel below. Also head over to draftscapes.com where you'll see a host of articles on landscape design and landscape architecture. Okay, thanks guys.